So today, the Total War Rome 2 Emperor Edition is now available to all who own Rome 2 for free via a Steam update, and I thought I'd take a look at the new campaign it offers, the Imperator Augustus campaign. Now, because a lot of the features that come in this campaign are also retroactively implemented in the Grand campaign, I won't spend too long on them, as I've already done a video covering most of them in depth, but I will give them a mention for those of you who may not follow Rome 2 closely. So first off, the Rome 2 Emperor Edition is free for all users that own Rome 2. If you own Rome 2, then today your game should have automatically upgraded to the Emperor Edition, and you should see the Imperator Augustus campaign in the main menu under the Grand Campaign section. The Imperator Augustus campaign offers 10 playable factions set in the year 41 BC, 3 years after the death of Julius Caesar, where the Republic was in a state of chaos, as there was now a huge power vacuum left by the dictator's demise. Octavian was the rightful heir by Caesar's will, and after fighting with Mark Antony in Gaul, he seized control of multiple legions and demanded the consulship from the Senate. Eventually, however, Antony, Lepidus and Octavian created the Second Triumvirate, and also prescribed 300 senators to be killed to remove opposition and to fund their wars against Caesar's killers. Once the liberators were all disposed of over the next year, the Triumvirate saw the drawing out of territories between the three. Octavian getting Gaul and Italy, Lepidus got Hispania and Africa, and Antony got Greece, Asia and Egypt. The threat of Sextus Pompey, who is Pompey the Great's son, still loomed in Sicily, but in reality he was never given any official territory until 35 BC. And so begins the campaign. There are now 4 Roman factions. Lepidus, who owns a majority of Spain and West Africa and has 2 client states, Iberia and Numidia, filling the gaps in territory. Lepidus is also spread thin, with 3 armies at about 15% strength, but with the sea and desert being natural boundaries, he only has to face north or east to gain new territories. The Cantabri and Mori have quite poor troop quality, so unifying all your holdings is fairly easy before deciding to attack other Romans. Octavian, who owns all of Italy and most of Gaul with the rest of it in client states, has a fairly large area to cover with only a couple armies. Most of the Gallic territories have a Celtic culture, and Octavian's biggest issue is keeping them subdued and happy. He is also surrounded on all sides by the various Roman factions, so if the Triumvirate breaks down early, Rome is the target for everyone else. Then we have Mark Antony, the largest of the 3, who owns Greece, the Balkans, Asia Minor and a sliver of Africa, and has many client states. Antony's situation is definitely that of a nation that is probably going to lose regions before it gains any, as he is at war with Parthia and 5 of their client states. He also borders Lepidus and Octavian, and doesn't have a dominant culture in any settlements. That said, he does seem to have a negative effect on public order from the presence of Latin culture, so I'm kinda confused on that one. Pompey, who owns Sicily, Corsica and Sardinia, starts with no client states. Because he is more of a naval force, it's actually quite difficult to build up any substantial armies in the beginning, and there is virtually no places to attack that aren't Roman, which isn't too bad as he isn't allied with any of them anyway. Each of the Roman factions have a massive negative culture bonus against each other of 140, though in my own campaign as Octavian I managed to get it to plus 50 relations with Antony, and we got trading, so it's not impossible to reverse the effect. Each Roman faction is the exact same as the other as far as I can tell. Because it's a later era, they can all recruit legionaries from the onset, and tech trees will get you the first cohort and praetorians. It's not all bad though. Because of the different starting areas, having different auxiliaries brings variation to the armies. Octavian can recruit Gallic troops, Lepidus has some Iberian and Numidian troops, and Antony has some eastern units to choose from should you wish to build auxiliaries. Of course, if you capture any of the other's territories, you can just recruit them yourself then. In one aspect, I think it's actually good that they are the same, as it makes sense as they are all part of one cohesive Rome, but it would have been nice to see some unique Roman-Greek hybrids or Egyptian or Gallic or whatever it may have been. A few great mods I played merge cultures a bit, offering unique buildings and units that might add to more diversity among the factions, but similarly, people may have found that a bit too gamey and unfair that some factions get things that others don't when they're all Roman. The auxiliary system works fine, so I don't really have an issue with that. Oh, and the 4 factions each have key leaders, who instead of being killed will only ever be wounded until their last battle. So that is the Roman factions in a nutshell. They are fun to play with, and there is actually a satisfying amount of tension between the 3 triumvirs. Every time I ended my turn as Octavian, I had to hope that Antony didn't surprise attack me while I had the majority of my forces up north. That kind of uneasy tension is something that is unique, as I haven't played a mod or anything quite like having massive superpowers all at each other's throats, where at any turn it could all go wrong and a massive war could erupt. Each of their victory conditions have regions you need to capture that are in each other's territories, so war is inevitable between them. Also, they all have the same tech trees that are partially complete and are similar to that of the Grand Campaign, except some buildings behave differently, like the Field of Mars grants legionaries and not hastati, for example. There are also some technologies that don't fit the name they have, like astronomy. This gives you political action bonuses, so not sure what looking to the stars has to do with that, but there you go. So on to the other factions. Each of these playable factions except Armenia have the exact same armies, campaign buffs and building chains as in the Grand Campaign, with some slight deviations to the tech trees as I mentioned before. So there are no new units to these factions, and in some cases they are just renamed or reskinned slightly. I'll go through their buffs anyway for those interested. So we have Parthia, now with a darker faction skin, starting with 13 regions and 6 client states. This nation is a behemoth in the campaign, already at war with Antony's Rome. They get extra trade with commerce, 25% extra ammo to missile units, minus 25% to cultural aversion, plus 1 experience to cavalry recruits, and plus 25% to slave unrest. Dacia, previously known as the Getae, now start with 4 regions and still have their pirates and raiders heritage, with cheaper mercenaries that cost more to upkeep. They have a diplomatic penalty to nomadic factions and a buff to defense in battles. They also have a slight public order buff with the presence of their own culture. Egypt, which have also undergone a slight reskin, start with 6 regions and begin as a client state under Antony. They have a plus 10% research rate, plus 1 experience for ship recruits, minus 10% resistance to foreign culture, plus 10% for all units fighting against a Hellenic faction, and a 25% plus to public order penalty from foreign cultures. The Iceni have been reskinned slightly also and now start with just 1 region in South Britain. They are defensive allies with the reskinned Imani to their west and are at war with a small faction to the north. Given them much the same start conditions as before, it's likely you will have to try and control Britain before giving a thought to the Gauls, who are under Roman subjugation. They have a diplomatic buff with all factions that have a different culture, plus 10 charge bonus when attacking for all units, minus 5% morale penalty for fighting in neutral or enemy territory, plus 10% for defense when fighting in an owned or allied territory, and finally a plus 1 to public order for every war with a neighbouring faction. Next is the Marcomanni, which were previously known as the Suebi and also have had a reskin. They start with just 1 region, bordering Octavian, and have a prime opportunity to invade, as most of his armies are further south. They have a plus 3% to tax rate, plus 10% morale when fighting barbarians, 20% income from raiding and sacking, and plus 1 to public order for every war with a neighbouring faction, and a 25% public order penalty from presence of foreign cultures. Lastly, we have Armenia, which were previously an unplayable faction and are now playable in both the Grand Campaign and the Imperator Augustus campaign. In the Grand Campaign they start with the province of Armenia, which is just 3 regions. Now in the Augustus campaign the province is 4 regions large and Armenia own 3 regions in it. They are a client state of Antony, meaning they are at war with about 7 factions and are defensive allies with Pontus. Their roster is decent but nothing special, with their strengths definitely lying in their cataphract cavalry and archers, much like the other eastern factions. They do have a unique mercenary unit of Cappadocian cavalry, which is actually pretty strong for its cost and is limited to 2 per army. Their bonuses are 10% wealth from all commerce trade, 25% ammunition for all missile units, a diplomatic bonus with all Hellenistic factions and Eastern factions, a 10% bonus to morale when fighting in owned territory, and a plus 10% cost to building naval units, which is by far the best penalty to have, as it's really something I've never used, which is building fleets. That's it for the factions. Aside from that, we have gotten some graphical enhancements, mainly in the form of lighting changes on the campaign map and in battles. Summer, spring, winter and autumn now have more distinct colour sets and ambience to battles, with natural haze being something I noticed, and just a greater contrast between colours without it feeling too bold. It actually does a lot to improve the look of the game. Many of you ask me if I change the colour much in my videos, and I do in some, but not for reviews, so what you're seeing here is what it looks like for me. There has also been a change to the UI, now with a black marble and gold lining texture across the board, with a more square and darker black tile rather than the rounded edges from before. Many factions have had their skins adjusted to be less bold in general, and this is for both the Grand Campaign and Augustus. Personally, I think the UI and the emblems look much better. I used to use a mod called Black Marble UI, and it seems like its popularity may have given CA some ideas, or it's just coincidence. Next up we have the new buildings and politics screen. I won't go into it too much about the new buildings, but basically there is now more emphasis on regions. Some regions are dedicated to their resource, like an Olive Grove village or winemaker town, and these can be upgraded to focus on that resource. This also affects armies, because iron can be used to build a shield makers or sword maker village, meaning elite weapons are harder to come by in general. The same goes for elite horses. Cities themselves can be upgraded to be civil or military focused for areas in need of public order. Villages can be upgraded to be civil, market or farm towns, allowing you to increase what kind of production you want. New mining buildings have been added and some public order buildings too that offer no negative effect. The same goes for grain silos, which offer food and replenishment for troops with no negative effect. This makes province management much more forgiving than it was previously, while still rewarding those who want to deal with the food public order struggle properly. Lastly, some regions are special, like Roma offering 1 unit extra recruitment or Carthago increasing commercial trade. Those stats can be checked in the bottom left when you have selected the city. Now on to politics. The politics screen has had a complete overhaul, which makes politics much more transparent than before. There are now 5 subsections to look at: politics, character, summary, records, and stats. The politics screen now shows you your influence and how close you are to civil war. The more influence you gain, the better the perks are that are faction-wide for you. For instance, at the moment on screen now, I currently hold an 82% majority of the Senate, which grants me an increased research rate, morale bonuses, tax rate, and public order buff in all regions. The lower my influence, the less these perks offer me, and eventually end up being negative, so it's important to stay on top of it. As an example, in my Octavian campaign, much of Sicily and Northern Gaul were losing public order quite substantially, but once I got my influence up to high enough, it was just enough to keep them in the green, so it's something that is useful. It's not just about avoiding rebellion, better public order means more growth and better tax yield. So how do you keep your influence up? You can achieve this by doing political actions, the best of which is just securing a promotion. Early on, securing a promotion is free and doesn't have any negative effects. In return, it instantly wins you some influence. However, you cannot just spam it forever. You need your characters to be a certain age and a certain rank to be eligible. This means fielding armies with those particular generals fighting them. Fighting battles and ranking up also gains your generals more gravitas and personal ambition. Gravitas and ambition combined contribute to the growth of your influence every turn, so basically what you'll want to do is fight with your own party's generals and keep them alive. This will keep your influence in your favour. If you need some extra help, you can spread rumours to lower the opposition's gravitas, kill them or marry them with someone from your family, which balances out the influence to the weaker party. Similarly, the AI will do the same, except you usually have a chance to stop it, at the cost of some influence and usually a lot of money. In my campaign, where I was only making 5,000 a turn, I had to spend 12,000 just to keep one of my generals from being adopted into the other party, which is really a tough decision. The other great thing about politics now is that you worry about losing your generals, and at 4 turns per year, you have enough time to connect with them a bit more and learn about who they are. Octavian and Agrippa are just some awesome generals in my campaign, and I've become attached to them. Nowhere near as previous games, but way more than any other Rome 2 campaign. Now the whole reason this politics exists is because of civil war. Now the campaign game is a giant Roman civil war, but unfortunately there is no cross-faction Roman politics with the other Romans. You have your own self-contained political system separate to the others. This is quite disappointing, as you can't imagine how brilliant it would be to have Mark Antony's generals assassinated, spread rumours about Lepidus and so on, actually affect each other because you are at war or about to be. It would also work better as you couldn't control their generals and stop them from ranking up. It really is a shame. Instead, you can have your own civil war. I never got to this stage due to the build I was using, but once your Imperium is high enough and your influence is great, you will get warnings about a civil war, and it will start costing a lot of money to stop it. When it does break out, any regions that your opposition generals are in will defect to the other side and be your new enemy. This makes for a very interesting gameplay, because you start to worry about armies that are strong, marching through important territories. A good example was that I had an opposition general marching with a powerful stack through Italy, and I suddenly became very aware that if a civil war were to break out, his army would convert Arretium and he could march on Rome very easily. So that power play is something that is very interesting. On one hand, you need good generals and armies to win wars, but on the other hand, you don't want opposition generals becoming too powerful. It's not always easy to keep them out of the fight, as eventually you'll need more than 4 armies on the offensive, and after a while recruiting new generals tends to lean towards the opposition family when you already have a majority. To see civil wars in action, I'll continue my campaign, and when it happens, I'll do a more in-depth video on what happened and how it happened. So click the link on screen now to go to that, or check the description. Remember, it will take me a few days to get to that stage. So that's politics. The summary screen is pretty much the same as before, showing you your Imperium level and the different effects that build up as your Imperium increases. The more your Imperium rises, the more other factions will hate you, and the more it costs to stop political actions. All in all, it looks like a pretty good system, but I've yet to trigger an actual civil war due to it just not happening in patch 15 beta, and it not really being available to me in the Imperator Augustus campaign beta as it's an early build. What I can say is that it's definitely made me pay attention to my generals a lot more, and that's a definite improvement from before. You now have legitimate reasons to check the politics screen. Hopefully it all works as expected and makes it very difficult to avoid civil wars. With all this, we've seen some major campaign and battle balancing going on. Pikemen just work better than before, melee infantry now have fire at will if they are carrying pilas, there is less attrition when besieging a settlement, naval combat has been tweaked and I still suck at it but it feels much more enjoyable. Battles in general last longer and morale has been improved so that troops are more likely to rejoin the fight once they've pushed away a bit. Meaning there is more than just that one initial big engagement, but more chances to turn it around later on. Some disappointing things however are the fact that you cannot play as Antony, Octavian, Pompey or Lepidus in multiplayer custom battles. It'd be nice to be able to choose your colour even though it's just a silly small thing, it'd still be cool to be able to represent them. You can still play in a co-op campaign however. Also, since all the factions except Armenia are just the same as before, it would have been nice to be able to play as more factions like Gaul or Iberia or Thrace for example. Just keep the rosters the same as before, set a few objectives and you're good to go. Instead I'm sure they'll be unlocked by modders for those who want it. Last thing worth mentioning is that the campaign map is the same size as before, but it seems like it has been polished up somewhat as it looks a bit better than before. Also, the provinces and regions have been redrawn somewhat, adding walls to new cities like Syracuse and Jerusalem for example. Oh, and I mainly did this review as Rome. I have tested out a few turns with each other faction, and they have similar building chains and tech trees, but they are different enough to distinguish them from Rome. The Marcomanni for example have a kind of industry around their military buildings, meaning that you can sacrifice some good unit recruitment options for more income. So there is a range of diversity among the different nations, I just don't have the time to go through everything in the video. So that's it for the review. I don't give scores in my reviews but just show you what you get and offer my opinion on it. Remember, this campaign is totally free so it's kinda hard to knock it. I had a few people ask me if they should buy Rome 2 now with these patches and campaigns and my answer is absolutely yes. Previously I used to say get it on a sale or wait for more updates. Well, the wait is over in my opinion. With all the content that's been added in the Emperor edition, it's well worth the full price. For items like Hannibal at the Gates or the Blood DLC, I'd perhaps still wait for a sale for them, but honestly the base game is now fantastic and worth the asking price. I hope you enjoyed this review, thanks for watching and that's all for me and I'll see you in the next one.